Toronto Maple Leafs are forced into an impossible decision. And following was a very disappointing Game 4 loss against the Senators, we have multiple huge Leafs updates to go over today as the Leafs are forced into one decision that is going to have massive implications going forward, not just in Game 5, but beyond that as well and into future series, assuming the Leafs get there. We're going to break that down and discuss what this means going forward. Stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get into it, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your support has been unbelievable. If you're a part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Darius, ton to go over today. The Leafs, obviously, it's an off day today, an off day tomorrow. There is some time in between games here to discuss some interesting things. We do have some updates, albeit the Leafs are, they have a couple days off here. I want to dive into a couple things. Now, we're going to start. There was some comments today from Craig Berube. We're going to start with those, and we're going to dive into an impossible decision that the Leafs are forced here. And the sentiment regarding this decision is kind of split in half. But first, I want to talk about yesterday's game a little bit because we have some more comments. Craig Berube spoke on what went wrong in the game yesterday, and he highlighted special teams. He gave up power play goal for them and a shorty against our power play. We had our opportunities with a 4-minute power play in overtime, and we couldn't get it done. And that 4-minute power play is going to be, depending how the series goes, stuck in a lot of Leafs fans' heads for a while. And Darius, I want to dive into it now. You look at the lines here, and it kind of flows into the power play a little bit because Max Pacioretty is on that line. There's going to be some changes had at some point in the playoffs. And the big question is now, do the Leafs, and I'll ask you this as well, do the Leafs replace Max Pacioretty? Because he was probably the worst Leaf on the ice yesterday. And following the inability to close the game out, this is a question and a decision the Leafs should be forced into making. And it's a very difficult one considering Pacioretty's impact in the first game he played, which was the polar opposite of yesterday's.
I mean, yeah, if we look at game 3, he was very effective, and that third line was very effective. But inside of the game yesterday, right, when you look at the lines, they were jumbled up and put in the blender around the second half of the second period onward, right? We saw McMahon kind of go up to the second line. Holmberg was moved down. They were kind of juggling things around. That's the biggest sign to me, because I don't think the Leafs were playing that bad. I actually think this was the one game in the entire series besides game 1 where they completely outplayed the Senators. So they weren't even playing that bad. But that's the biggest sign to me that something isn't working, and Berube was trying to find something. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. And for those of you who've been subscribed to the channel for a long time, I'm a big Nick Robertson guy, and I think that Nick Robertson should return to the lineup for Game 5. We know how he responds every time that he's scratched, and I thought that he had a strong start to the series, but after Game 2, he wasn't bringing what he should bring to the table, so he was scratched, which I think is the correct course of action. And then in Game 3, Pacioretty actually looked really good, but last night I thought he looked slow. He wasn't making plays, and he just looked out of place. So I think that Robertson should return to the lineup, and again, I think for any, especially these two, because these two are going to keep replacing each other, especially if the Leafs go on a run here, right? But for really everyone in the lineup, if you're not going, it's the playoffs, right? It's a short leash. You're going to get pulled here. And I said that about Pacioretty from the start. I think Pacioretty could find himself in the lineup on the road. That's exactly what happened after, the start of this series. But I said that if he wasn't going if there was one game where he wasn't good, you got to come out of the lineup. And that's exactly what's happening now. So I do think that Robertson could be back in the lineup for Game 5. I would put him back in the lineup, especially because, again, we know how he responds after being scratched. He could end up scoring a goal, or he's going to be throwing the body around, stuff like that. So we'll see what happens with the lineup decision, because, again, today is a complete off day. They're not practicing anything. They're back on the ice tomorrow, and then obviously Game 5 on Tuesday. But I definitely would swap those two for sure.
Yeah, tomorrow's going to be the big decision regarding that. Looking at, again, the lines, it's going to be between Nick Robertson and Max Pacioretty. The question that could arise is, does David Kampf factor into the lineup at all? And as you look at some of the, Max Pacioretty, he's still throwing his body around. However, he looked slow compared to the Senators yesterday, but the Leafs did ultimately play a very good game. And Craig Berube spoke out some more on how that game went regarding the 4-minute power play. We had some looks. We had some good looks. Matthews at the post, and we had some other good looks as well. It didn't go in. I'm not going to look at it too much. We didn't get a bounce. And of course, you can see this here. We hit a post, had other good opportunities. JT is really good in the power play for us, but obviously we had our looks. And looking back at the game now after having some time to kind of refresh about it, the Leafs almost won the game multiple times, and the Senators almost won a few times as well. It was a pretty weak goal by Stolarz that let it up. And I don't want to blame, the game necessarily. I don't think it was Max Pacioretty's fault they lost the game, although he did look fairly slow out there. I think that in the playoffs right now, they're going to be making changes almost on basically a game-by-game basis, especially with, the Leafs have in a weird spot. They have 3 players, 2 on the bench and 1 obviously playing, that are very similar in total skill. They just provide different things to the team. Obviously, Robertson can hopefully provide them some goal scoring. Pacioretty is going to be physical. David Kamp's great in the PK, different positions, kind of, with David Kamp. It's a very difficult decision. And speaking of decisions, there's also some people talking about, Anthony Stolarz versus Joseph Woll. It's just not going to happen. I don't think there's no world
No.
where Joseph Wall goes in. There's a lot of people talking about it, and Craig Berube kind of reaffirmed that without saying that. We'll know for sure tomorrow. Solid on the last goal. He can't see anything there. There were a lot of people in front of him on that shot. He made a lot of good saves for us. I thought he was comfortable and played well. I am not concerned about Stolarz. So honestly, a very positive remark from Craig Berube on Stolarz, which was a pretty bad game for him, at least in my opinion. We can be a bit harder on him than the coach will publicly. Pretty bad game. They probably win if he was on his A game yesterday, but it's another decision they're going to be forced into making. And another thing regarding that is you're not going to put a guy who hasn't played a playoff game all series into the playoffs for a spot like this in Joseph Wall. So it's going to be interesting there. But again, there's multiple decisions here between the three players, between Wall, between Stolarz. I think it's going to be Stolarz, and probably with you. I think it's probably going to be Nick Robertson, though I'm not entirely sure they love the idea of having him out there and taking another irresponsible penalty, which is the biggest concern for him and something we've been keeping an eye on all year.
It's definitely a concern because that happened. That's the reason he came out in game four game threes because of that, right? And obviously he wasn't doing what made him effective in game one. So I could see that. The thing with David Camp for me is if he was to come into the lineup, he's not going to come in on the third line. And I don't think you can mess with the fourth line right now. The chemistry, everything about the fourth line has been fantastic in this series. I wouldn't mess with them. They're winning the majority of their shifts and they're doing exactly what a fourth line should do. So I wouldn't mess with that yet. I think there's a time and a place coming for David Camp, especially if this team goes on a run, which they should. It's not doomsday here yet, ladies and gentlemen, right? The Leafs still have a 3-1 series lead, of course. So, looking obviously towards game 5, but then you have to start thinking about the future as well. That starts to creep in a little bit. But in terms of Stolarz and like what you brought up, Stolarz would have to be incapable of playing. He would have to be injured to come out of any game at this point in this playoffs because he's been fantastic. He had one bad game yesterday, and even then, some of the goals, like you said, as you have time to reflect on the game, a lot of them you can't see, right? But if you're going to pin one game on him, maybe it's this one, right? But I'm not even prepared to do that. He's been great. So I don't think, again, big fan of Joseph Woll as well, and I really believe in him, and I think he will be the goaltender of the future for the Leafs, along with some other guys in the Marlies. But I think it's Stolarz' net until unless he can't play. He literally physically cannot play. So he's going to go in game 5 for sure. And I expect him to have a bounce back game. I think they're going to have another strong performance as a team, and I think he's going to have a really strong performance as well, because that's what we've seen all year. He just came off of winning 11 in a row. You're going to lose some games. It just happens in the NHL, especially in the playoffs. So I think he's going to have a really good bounce back game. So it's going to be a fun game 5. They have an opportunity to close this series out on home ice now. And let's hope that it doesn't go past game 5. You have a really good opportunity in front of you, but I do think there's going to be one change. But that's kind of how I feel about David Camp. Again, let us know in the comments how you feel, but I wouldn't mess with the chemistry of obviously the fourth line because they've been fantastic.
Yeah, the Steelers' first loss, and like you mentioned, this was his 12th game, but first loss in 11 games. And yeah, I don't think they're going to mess with the fourth line. The second line, Holmberg honestly played really well yesterday, despite him not having a great game or a great series to date. Couple other things here. Craig Berube pushed back on the idea that there's any concern about the lack of killer instinct. Obviously, Berube wasn't around for all of this. It's his first year with the Leafs. I don't think that was the case tonight. I thought our team played extremely hard and did a lot of great things. We gave up 4 shots in 2 periods. I do agree with this. Like the sentiment of, obviously, we're all used to the Leafs choking, the 3-1 lead against Ottawa, all these different things. The Leafs played a really good game yesterday. It didn't look like a team that was scared to close a series or anything like that. It just looked like a game where the Leafs got a little bit unlucky. They didn't have their, A+ game, even though they still looked very good. So I don't think that's going to be a concern ultimately, and it's going to be interesting. But one other thing before we wrap up here, we'll cover this tomorrow as well. There's seemingly going to be some moves on the horizon in the eliminated Marlies to get some guys up for the playoffs. Now, they're not going to play in any games, just like Ryan Reeves. He came up for the vibes. We're going to get some exposure to the NHL atmosphere. Any thoughts on this? It's you always love to see it. We saw the Senators do it yesterday, I believe. They called up basically everyone, so Brad Treliving is going to follow suit here ahead of a very interesting game 5.
Yeah, I love this. And they always do a feature around the Stanley Cup final about the guys who travel with the team that never play. So I always, find that very interesting. So I like that. And I think a lot of the Marlies, especially the younger guys, can kind of take a lot from what they're going to see being, in the midst of this and with the Leafs up 3-1 and, what it takes to win in the playoffs and what they do to prepare for every game. So I think it's a good thing. It just makes sense. The Marlies obviously got eliminated. It was not ideal to end their season because the AHL playoffs are weird. It was a best of 3 to open the playoffs. So obviously their season ended quickly, but yeah, I think it's a good thing, and I think that most teams do it, and I'm glad that the Leafs are doing it too.
Yeah, that's what I have all your thoughts are on that. To the new news coming out, we're gonna have a bunch of stuff tomorrow, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Of course, we'll have a stream following Game 5. Let us know below if you think Nick Robertson's gonna come in for Max Pacioretty.